Well, the SNP are very, very big players in this. I'm delighted to say Ian Blackford, who's leader of the SNP in the House of Commons, is joining me now. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Gavin. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And now, where is the SNP on this? Because it would appear that you too are prepared at least to meet and talk and figure out what's going on here.
Yes, of course, we have to do that, because the harsh reality, Gavin, is that we're several weeks away from crashing out of the European Union on a no-deal basis, something that I believe is going to be absolutely catastrophic for Scotland and for the rest of the United Kingdom. And I would simply say that all parliamentarians that see the risks of that have got an obligation to work together. We're only going to get, I think, one chance to get this right. And we need to make sure that we've got a plan which is deliverable when we get back to Parliament in the first week of September. Now, what I would simply say, if we go back to just before recess, there was a vote in Parliament to stop Boris Johnson closing down Parliament, to prorogue Parliament, if you like, and that had a majority of 41. It is my clear opinion that there is, I actually think, a reasonable majority of parliamentarians that are firmly opposed to no deal. The obligation that we've got is to work together to make sure that we have a mechanism that can take no deal off the table as a default position. I think we can do that, but there has to be a generosity of spirit in us working together. I believe what we should be doing is making sure that we can take control, we seize control of the order paper at Westminster, that we can bring forward legislation that will strike out no deal as that default option. That is the first thing that we should be doing, and I'm more than happy to sit down with Jeremy and anyone else to discuss the ideas that he has and to make sure that we can build a consensus. But I'm under no illusion that we are in a real crisis. This is a defining moment in the political history of the United Kingdom, and we'll be judged as to how we react to that crisis. And I'm not going to rule out anything at this stage, and I'll certainly respectfully listen to Jeremy, but all of us have to recognise the scale of the challenge that we face. We have to stop Boris. I believe that we can, but none of us should be ruling anything out at this stage in order to do that. And that means that we have to work across the SNP, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, Plaid, Greens, and indeed Conservatives that share that horror as to what no deal would mean for all of our nations in the United Kingdom.
You have been very clear that this is a big moment in history, a huge moment for every part of the United Kingdom. Yeah. However, that's the principle. The principle that behind this is stopping no deal, but the practicality might mean putting Jeremy Corbyn in number 10 Downing Street. And I know that that would be very difficult for some SNP supporters to bear.
Well, look, at the end of the day, I think we've got an obligation to do the right thing, to make sure that no deal can happen. I don't want to see Boris Johnson continue as Prime Minister. We will do what is necessary to defend the economic interests of the people of Scotland. And of course, I need to make the point, Gavin, that I think we've actually had a dysfunctional Westminster over the course of the last few years. We were told after our own referendum that Scotland's place would be respected. That hasn't happened. And I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the people of Scotland have that right to determine their own future as well. So that's part of this process. And I certainly look forward to the day that Scotland can become an independent member of the European Union. But in the meantime, while we're part of the UK, we have to work together to best effects. And we did say in the election in 2015 and 2017 that we wanted to form part of a progressive alliance. I'm happy to have discussions with Jeremy. There are things that I don't share on his politics, but we have got a responsibility at a time of crisis to try and see how we best find a way out of this morass. That I want an election, that I want an opportunity for all the people of the United Kingdom to have their say. Of course I do. And what I will say on behalf of the SNP, that we will work constructively with Jeremy and others to make sure that we get to a safe landing place.
I know that there's people within the Labour Party, including Labour MPs, because I've spoken to them about this, who are slightly worried that what he's not said, he's not clearly said a referendum, he's talked about a general election, and he's not clearly said that Labour would campaign to remain. And I'm not asking you to negotiate with me, but are those worries for you, that he has consistently been unclear in the view of some people, or not unequivocal about some of these issues?
No, absolutely. And it's I guess I would say out of frustration that I would say that the Labour Party hasn't fulfilled that role of the principal opposition over the course of the last few years, because it has been unclear as to what the position on Brexit has been.
Well, you're the leader of the opposition. I've been wondering whether you're the leader of the opposition.
Well, that's
Maybe you could be Prime Minister.
Well, I'm not putting myself up for that. But what I'm saying is that I think all of us have got an obligation to work together. That's really the important thing. I think Labour have got to come off the fence, and I think they did pay a price electorally in the European elections for the stance that they've taken. They fell to 5th place in Scotland. They used to be the leading party in Scotland. This is astonishing. They've got to make sure that they're relevant in this debate. And I think Jeremy's got to come off the fence, and he's got to recognise that, never mind a no-deal Brexit, but Brexit in itself is something that's going to make us poorer. There is no formulation of Brexit that is going to make us better off than the status quo. But it's not just about the economics. It's also about socially and culturally. The fact that, for me, the European Union has been a very successful peace project over the course of the last 70-odd years, born out of the horrors of the two world wars. And it's up to all of us to talk about the great strength that we've had from our membership of the European Union. And it's a great pity that Jeremy, as leader of the Labour Party, hasn't expressed that view with any degree of clarity.
Well, I'm not privy to Dominic Cummings' capacious brain, but let me suggest to you that what's going on might be characterised by that key advisor to Boris Johnson is as follows. This is a backstairs deal by the parliamentary elite who are trying to conspire against the will of the people, something like that. I mean, you know the rhetoric just as well as I do. I mean, that's sort of what we will be reading about in some of the newspapers coming up, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but it's nonsense, of course, because no party has been saying that out of the referendum in 2016 that we should be looking at a no-deal Brexit. Boris Johnson and his cohorts all told us that getting a deal would be the easiest thing imaginable. We've got to recognise, and it's the UK government, the IMF, the Bank of England, they've all told us that leaving the European Union on a no-deal basis is going to be harmful. There is a broad consensus that it will push us into recession. We've got to also take on board that the world economy is slowing. The risks that we are putting in front of the people of the United Kingdom are extraordinary. When you consider that the financial crisis in 2008 reduced GDP by 2%, and the Treasury's own forecasts are that Brexit will reduce GDP by, I think, between 1 and 4 times that number. This is extraordinary, and this will do immense damage to the fabric of our society, of our communities. It's going to mean that people will lose their jobs. The threat to food supply, the threat to the supply of medicines. What you've actually got are Dominic Cummings and those of his ilk that are threatening effectively public order in the United Kingdom as a consequence of what they're bringing forward. And we have to stand up and say, as parliamentarians, that we have an obligation to be honest with people.
And are you, just one sort of allied issue here, are you encouraged that, because you talked about cooperation and people prepared to move a little bit, do you think Labour has moved about a second independence referendum in Scotland? Do you think, and also do you think that is inevitable, whichever government takes over next?
I think when you look at the polls, and certainly you look at the Ashcroft poll last week, it's indicating that there is majority support for independence. But beyond that, I think most people now recognise that it should happen. And indeed, I think even those that are opposed to independence, I suspect, see that there's an inevitability about that. What I'd simply say, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn or anyone else, they've got to respect the right of the people of Scotland to make their own determination as to their future. And the government in Edinburgh has a mandate given to it by the people of Scotland in the election to the Scottish Parliament in 2016. Westminster should respect that. We need to do what happened last time, which is we get round the table and we make an agreement, the Edinburgh Agreement that we had then, the gold standard as to how to hold a referendum. And let's have that discussion in Scotland as to what kind of country that we want to live in, and be respectful of all opinions. But I want to focus on how we can make sure that Scotland is a destination in Europe, how we can build a country where we can deliver sustainable economic growth, deliver fairness, deal with the issues of lack of equality which is here, but to make sure at the same time that we take our responsibilities for the climate. There's a very positive discussion, and I welcome contributions to that debate from all sides, but let's have that debate about how we get out of this mess and get to a position where we can really have a a country, an independent country that we can be proud of, that's respectful of everyone's position.
Well, just as a final thought on that, then you will have learned certain things for the use of the will of the people rhetoric when people are divided, because whatever happens, even if there is a majority for independence, there will be some people within Scotland who still won't like it. So you will have, if that does happen, you will have big bridges to build with those people.
Gavin, I give you an absolute promise on that, and that's why I used the language that, when I answered your last question, that we've got a responsibility to listen and to respect those that have a different view and to take them with us. And I think we've got to have a debate about how Scotland's changed under the Scottish Parliament. I think many of the good things that have happened as a consequence of that. We need to recognise that there are divisions in society. We need to begin to pull those together, and we do that by recognising all the arguments on both sides of the debate and giving effective leadership. That's what's been missing at Westminster.